The dust on his boots felt heavier than usual, each step echoing the unspoken resentment that had simmered for years. He always figured the old man, Sheriff Brody, just hated the wild in him, the untamed spirit that refused to bend. But now, seeing the lawman laid low, a ragged breath rattling in his chest, a cold dread snaked around his heart. The air in that room, thick with the scent of pine and regret, held a truth he wasn't ready to hear, a truth about blood and justice that rarely rode the same trail. The first light of dawn was just bleeding into the sky, painting the eastern horizon in hues of bruised purple and weak orange, when Jack Brody, known simply as Brody's boy to most, or Wild Jack to those who de-seen him on a bad night, rode into redemption. The town, a huddle of sun-baked wood and ambition, looked no different than it always did. Sleepy, unforgiving. And under the iron thumb of his father, Sheriff Elias Brody, Jack's routine was simple. Ride in, sell a few head of cattle at the market, grab a stiff drink at the saloon, and ride out before the old man could even sniff his presence. Today, though, felt off. The usual morning bustle was muted, replaced by a strange, quiet tension. He dismounted in front of the livery. The familiar creak of the old wooden sign, a welcome sound in the stillness. "Morning, Silas," Jack grunted, tossing the reins to the stable hand. Silas, a man whose face was etched with more wrinkles than a dried-up riverbed, usually had a greeting ready, a complaint about the weather, or a bit of gossip. But today, Silas merely nodded, his eyes wide with an unspoken worry. "Rough night, Jack," he muttered, avoiding eye contact as he led Jack's horse into the stable. Jack frowned. Silas wasn't one for dramatics. He glanced down the main street. A small knot of townsfolk stood outside the general store, murmuring, their faces grim. A sense of unease, cold and sharp, pricked at Jack's skin. It was more than just the usual discomfort he felt being back in his father's town. Something was genuinely wrong. He felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut, the same one he got before a stampede, a mix of alertness and grim anticipation. His hand instinctively brushed the worn handle of his Colt, a silent comfort. He wasn't one to meddle, especially not in his father's affairs, but the quiet of redemption felt like a coiled rattler ready to strike. He had two choices: ride on, ignore the palpable tension, and uphold his usual disdain for the town, or step into the unsettling calm. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that if he rode away now, he'd be leaving something important behind, something that whispered his father's name. He turned towards the gathering crowd, a decision heavy and unwelcome, settling in his soul. The murmurs outside the general store grew louder as Jack approached, punctuated by hushed whispers of sheriff and bad shape. He pushed through the small crowd, his eyes scanning for Silas or anyone who might offer a straightforward answer. Instead, his gaze landed on Doc Jenkins, the town's grizzled physician, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond lack of sleep. Doc Jenkins emerged from the store, shaking his head. "He's not long for this world, son," the doctor said, his voice low, catching Jack's eye. The bullets lodged deep. "Lost too much blood." Jack's breath hitched. A bullet? His father? The news hit him like a kick to the gut. All the resentment, the years of perceived hatred, momentarily vanished, replaced by a raw, confusing ache. What happened? Jack asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Ambush, down by the old Picken Creek crossing," Doc replied, wiping a weary hand across his brow. "Ryder came in this morning. Found him. Been out there all night." Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows of the alleyway beside the store, moving with a predatory slink. It was Silas Blackwood, a notorious bounty hunter who occasionally drifted through redemption, his reputation as dark as his name. Blackwood was a man of few words, but every one of them usually carried the weight of a threat. His eyes, cold and calculating, met Jack's. "Heard the news, Brody. A damn shame. Who'd be fool enough to shoot Sheriff Brody?" Blackwood's tone was deceptively smooth, but Jack caught the glint of something akin to satisfaction in his eyes. "That's what I aim to find out," Jack said, his voice flat, a challenge hanging in the air between them. Blackwood merely grunted, a thin smile playing on his lips before melting back into the shadows. The brief exchange left Jack with a bitter taste in his mouth. Blackwood had no love for the sheriff. That much was clear. The town's problems suddenly felt like his own. His father, the man he believed despised him, was dying, and some anonymous coward had pulled the trigger. Jack felt a surge of cold fury, quickly followed by a sense of loss. Control, something he always valued, was slipping through his fingers like sand. He'd come to redemption for a quick sale and a quiet departure, and now he was entangled in a web of violence and impending grief. The silence around him, once merely uncomfortable, now felt like a heavy shroud. He had lost the peace of his routine, the simple anonymity he craved. And with his father fading, he was about to lose even more. The small room above the general store reeked of liniment and impending death. Jack stood by the bedside, watching the shallow rise and fall of his father's chest. Sheriff Elias Brody, a man who had seemed as unyielding as the granite mountains surrounding Redemption, was now a pale, broken shadow. "He's been asking for you, Jack," Doc Jenkins said, his voice quiet, almost an apology. "Called your name a few times." Jack's jaw tightened. "Never asked for me before," he muttered, bitterness lacing his words. His mind drifted back, years ago, to the day he'd left home. He was 16, wild and reckless, caught in a bar brawl that had spilled out into the street. The sheriff, his father, had cuffed him, dragged him through town, and thrown him in the jail cell as if he were any other vagrant. "You're a disgrace, Jack," he'd said, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You'll never amount to anything but trouble." Jack had never forgotten that sting, that public humiliation. He'd ridden out of Redemption the next morning, vowing never to return, never to be under his father's shadow again. A groan from the bed pulled him back. Elias's eyes, clouded with pain, fluttered open. He looked at Jack, a flicker of something Jack couldn't quite decipher in their depths. "Jack," Elias rasped, his voice barely a whisper, There's something you need to know." Jack leaned closer, a strange mix of dread and morbid curiosity swirling within him. He wanted to pull away, to keep the protective wall he built around his heart. But a faint tremor in his father's hand, reaching out, stopped him. The ambush. "It wasn't just about me," Elias continued, each word a struggle. "They were after the ledger. The one from the old Carson gang. I'd found it. Names. He coughed, a wet rattling sound. "Names of men in this town who helped them." A sudden understanding, cold and clear as mountain spring water, washed over Jack. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This was something deeper, something tied to the dark underbelly of Redemption, a past he hadn't known existed. The Carson gang, they'd been a legend, ruthless and elusive, vanished years ago after a bloody shootout. But the ledger, that changed everything. "Why me?" Jack asked, his voice strained. "Why tell me this now?" Elias's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jack saw not judgment, but a profound weariness, a deep sorrow. "Because you're the only one I can trust, Jack. The only one who isn't tainted by this town." His father's grip tightened on Jack's hand, a surprising strength in his fading body. "The ledger, it's hidden in the old well on the Carson ranch. You gotta get it. Clear my name. Clear the truth." The sheriff's words hung heavy in the air. The Carson ranch was miles out of town, a desolate, forgotten place. Jack felt a powerful internal struggle erupt. His heart screamed for him to walk away, to let the old man's secrets die with him, to finally be free of Redemption and its tangled web. But then he looked at his father's face, etched with a desperate plea and a different voice. One he rarely listened to, whispered, justice. It was a choice between the bitter freedom he craved and the heavy burden of truth. A burden that now, unexpectedly, rested squarely on his shoulders. The ride to the old Carson Ranch was a journey into the heart of Jack's own conflicted past. Every dust mote kicked up by his horse felt like a memory, every gust of wind a whisper of the sheriff's dying words. The ranch itself was a skeletal silhouette against the setting sun, a monument to forgotten violence. The dilapidated house sagged, its windows like empty eyesores, and the barn leaned precariously, ready to surrender to the elements. As Jack dismounted, he heard it, the faint creak of a saddle, the soft jingle of spurs. He wasn't alone. From the shadowed remains of the barn, Silas Blackwood emerged, his Colt already drawn. His cold eyes gleamed in the fading light. "Knew you'd come, Brody," Blackwood said, his voice a low growl. "Always did have a soft spot for lost causes, didn't you?" "Like your old man." Jack's hand hovered over his own weapon. "You shot him, didn't you?" Blackwood let out a short, humorless laugh. Sheriff Brody was a meddling fool, digging up old bones. Some things are best left buried, wouldn't you say? He took a step forward, his gun steady. "That ledger, Brody. I'm guessing the old man blabbed. It's time for that to disappear, permanently, along with you." "So you're one of them," Jack stated, the realization a bitter taste in his mouth. Blackwood's silence was answer enough. The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. Jack had faced down desperate men before, but this was different. This wasn't just a gunfight. It was a confrontation with the ugly truth of his father's life, and now his own. "Drop it, Brody. You're outmatched," Blackwood sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Jack looked around the desolate ranch, the ghosts of its violent history seeming to rise from the dust. He had two choices: surrender and let the truth be buried forever, or fight, knowing he was probably walking into his own death. He thought of his father's plea, the desperate look in his eyes. And then he remembered the day he'd left redemption, the shame, the anger. This wasn't just about the ledger anymore. It was about proving something to himself and to the dying man in town. "Never been one to drop anything, Blackwood," Jack retorted, his voice calm despite the frantic beat of his heart. Then everything seemed to happen at once. Blackwood fired, the shot echoing across the silent ranch. Jack dived, rolling behind a fallen wagon wheel. He felt the searing heat of the bullet as it grazed his arm, a sharp pain blooming. He scrambled, returning fire, aiming for the shadows where Blackwood had moved. A second shot from Blackwood splintered the wood near his head. Jack was pinned, out in the open, and Blackwood was a trained killer. Just when he thought it was over, just as he heard Blackwood move, closing in for the kill, a loud, piercing whistle split the air. From behind the ranch house, two more riders appeared, silhouetted against the last vestiges of twilight. They were armed, and they were riding fast, straight towards Blackwood. Jack knew instantly. Blackwood wasn't alone. This wasn't just a bounty hunter. This was a gang. The odds had just tipped impossibly against him. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving Jack's body a trembling mess. His arm throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that echoed the hollow feeling in his gut. Blackwood and his two riders, caught off guard by the unexpected arrival of an unknown presence, had retreated into the vast, unforgiving darkness of the range, disappearing as quickly as they'd appeared. But Jack knew they'd be back. The ledger was too important. He was alone again, the silence of the old ranch pressing in on him, amplifying the throbbing pain and the gnawing doubts. He found the old well, its stone rim crumbling, hidden behind a stand of gnarled mesquite trees. The air around it felt cooler, damp. He lowered himself, painfully, into the narrow shaft, the rope biting into his injured arm. The descent was slow, deliberate, each handhold a testament to his weakening strength. He felt like he was descending into the very depths of his own past, searching for a truth he hadn't asked for. At the bottom, amongst the cold, damp stones, he found it, a small leather-bound ledger, wrapped in oilskin. It felt surprisingly light in his hand, yet its weight was immense, a burden he never intended to carry. He stared at it, the names and secrets it held, and a profound loneliness washed over him. Even now, with his father dying and a target on his back, he felt a familiar isolation. Cowboys were solitary creatures, he thought, even when surrounded by a bustling town. They rode alone, fought alone, and often died alone. He hauled himself back up, his muscles screaming in protest. As he emerged from the well, the first sliver of moon peeked over the horizon, casting a pale, ghostly light over the ranch. It reminded him of the first chapter, the faint dawn light of redemption. But now, that light wasn't just a new day. It was a new understanding. His father, the man he believed hated him, had entrusted him with his legacy, with the very truth he had tried to bury. A distant whinny of a horse cut through the night, a sharp reminder of the danger lurking just beyond the darkness. Blackwood would return. This wasn't over. Jack had a choice. He could abandon the ledger, ride away, and disappear into the vastness of the West, leaving redemption to its own rot. Or he could face the approaching storm, deliver the ledger, and finish what his father had started. The risk was immense, his chances slim, but the image of his father's dying face, pleading, unwavering, solidified his resolve. With a grim determination and a heavy heart filled with both courage and lingering doubt, he mounted his horse, the ledger tucked safely inside his worn saddlebag, and rode towards the inevitable confrontation. The ride back to redemption under the pale moonlight was a silent testament to the burden Jack now carried. His arm throbbed, a constant reminder of the fight ahead, but the pain was a dull counterpoint to the sharp clarity in his mind. He was no longer just Wild Jack, running from a past he misunderstood. He was his son, carrying his father's truth, riding into a storm he now understood. He slipped into town just before dawn, the streets still empty, silent. He headed straight for the sheriff's office, a place he'd avoided for years. The door was unlocked, a single lamp burning low on the desk, casting long shadows. He laid the ledger on the worn wood, its oilskin cover reflecting the dim light. It felt heavy, not with paper, but with the weight of shattered illusions and newly forged purpose. He found Doc Jenkins in the back room, slumped in a chair, a look of profound grief etched on his face. "He's gone, Jack," the doc said, his voice thick with emotion. "Just after midnight." A strange calm settled over Jack. No tears, no dramatic outbursts. Just a quiet, profound emptiness. He walked back to the main office, picked up the ledger, and laid it open. The pages were filled with names, dates, and illicit transactions, the full, horrifying truth of the Carson gang and their local conspirators. Blackwood's name was there, prominently. Later that morning, as the sun began its ascent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and golds, Jack stood in the street. Blackwood and his remaining men had indeed returned, drawn like vultures to the scent of weakness. But Jack was ready. The townsfolk, sensing the shift in the air, had gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and hesitant hope. The confrontation was swift, brutal, and without mercy. Jack, fueled by a cold resolve, moved with a precision born of years on the wild frontier, now sharpened by a newfound purpose. The fight was over almost as quickly as it began, leaving Blackwood and his men sprawled in the dusty street. Justice, raw and unyielding, had finally ridden into redemption. Doc Jenkins, his face still somber, approached Jack, a silent nod passing between them. The town, once a place of resentment, now looked at him with something akin to respect, even understanding. He was no longer just the wild son. He was the one who had brought the truth to light. Jack walked away from the scene, leaving the townsfolk to deal with the aftermath. He didn't stay for the praise, nor for the pity. He mounted his horse, the morning sun now high in the sky, warming his face. Redemption was still redemption, but something within him had fundamentally shifted. He hadn't sought this, hadn't wanted it, but he had seen it through. As he rode out of town, leaving the dusty streets and lingering shadows behind, he looked back one last time. The sheriff's office, the stable, the general store, they all seemed to shimmer in the heat, somehow different. He thought of his father, the hard man who had, in his dying breath, given his son a purpose. The trail ahead was long, and for the first time, it felt less like an escape and more like a journey. He was still a cowboy, forever bound to the open range, but he was also something more. He carried the weight of justice and the quiet understanding that sometimes the wildest hearts are the ones truly capable of redemption. Some truths, you see, they ain't found on any map, but etched deep in the soul, guiding a man home, even when he don't know he's been lost.